Commentary, entertainment, and sports. Steve and his team bring you the latest news and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
Back, and we're going to be joined just momentarily by Patrick J. Buchanan. So great to have him walking around the studio outside, signing autographs like a real celebrity, which of course Pat is. And he writes about Richard Nixon. And in this hour, we'll also talk to Craig Shirley, as I mentioned, who wrote a cover story, the cover story for Newsmax, the magazine, July issue, with Richard Nixon, of course, on the cover. So lots to learn from the Newsmax story by Craig Shirley and from the book by Pat Buchanan, which really talks about how defeat turned into success for Richard Nixon. Let's watch this from Richard Nixon.
The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. This honor now beckons America, the chance to help lead the world at last out of the valley of turmoil and onto that high ground of peace that man has dreamed of since the dawn of civilization. If we succeed, generations to come will say of us now living that we mastered our moment, that we helped make the world safe for mankind. This is our summons to greatness.
All right, 1969, Richard Nixon, inaugural address, and joining us now is the man who has written the book, as they say, quite literally.
Accountable for the fact.
Well, we'll let that go. A best-selling author, former Republican presidential candidate, and former senior advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan. And the new book is The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority. Welcome to the studio, sir.
Good to see you, Steve.
Great.
I'm usually by telephone.
Yes.
In my basement.
And we won't ask what you're wearing in the basement. The PF Flyers, I think we once addressed the sneakers, you and I.
Okay, right.
Keds, PF Flyers, whatever we were talking about.
Right.
But okay.
Converse All-Stars, I think.
Converse All-Stars, and I brought up the PF Flyers and the Keds. Anyway, did Richard Nixon wear sneakers?
I know he didn't. Richard Nixon wore Florsheim shoes even on the beach. Haven't you seen the photographs of Nixon walking on the beach? It's in coat and tie and the Florsheim shoes.
Kind of awkward, I guess. Yeah, kind of a strict dress code. All right, so congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And a wonderful piece of work. No surprise there. What were you trying to get across? Because when, public perception of Richard Nixon, I think in that latest poll, Quinnipiac, where Obama ranked as the worst since World War II, of course, Nixon was right above him. So how do you
Nixon
change
was right below him. Nixon was third. I think Carter was second. It was Obama, Carter, Nixon.
Yeah.
Nixon was down to 15. We're moving on up here.
Yeah, well, how do you change that perception?
I can't change that perception. People, I mean, looking back on it, that's 50 years ago now. People say Nixon, they say China, the opening to China, and they say Watergate. And what happened to Watergate? Well, they were all thugging or did something or did. So people understand it. This book, though, The Greatest Comeback, doesn't even deal with the Nixon presidency, and the Watergate was at the tail end of a 5-year, 6-year presidency. This deals with the years from 1964, basically when Goldwater went down to defeat. Nixon had been defeated by Kennedy narrowly, routed in California, said goodbye and good luck, you're not going to have me to kick around anymore. Comes to New York, goes down to Wall Street, practices law, Goldwater loses, and I show up there and I say, look, if you're going to run in 68, and I think we can put this together, I'd like to get aboard early. So, Steve, I was the very first one, other than Rosemary Woods, who was in there, who joined with Richard Nixon, and the only one up until mid-1967. And here's someone who is plotting to be the President of the United States, nobody in there, and how he did it, to come back from defeat and humiliation and the routing of his party and splintering of his party, and then to maneuver through 1968 when you got Tet Offensive, the day we announced. You got the massacre in Way. You got Gene McCarthy wounding the president, Bobby Kennedy jumping on the president quitting. 4 days later, Dr. King is murdered in Memphis. 100 cities up in flames. And you got Bobby Kennedy shot when he wins California. And then I was at the Democratic Convention, if you read in there, at the Comrade Hilton with Norman Mailer as a thing came apart. How did Nixon, this guy from the 50s, who's not charismatic, who's indeed intelligent, clever and everything, how did he maneuver through all this violence and war to be taking an oath as President of the United States in 1969, and that's the story.
And in some way, some odd way,
Right.
did all the chaos that you just described help in that effort?
It did indeed, because Nixon, the crime was rising, the riots broken out, civil rights revolution was basically breaking apart into these riots and disorders. Students were, violent, on the campuses. Columbia blew up, anti-war demonstrations, and Nixon was sort of representative of the middle America, what he came to call, and it's a phrase that I gave him, the silent majority. And he would say in 1969, look, they're trying to break me the way they broke Lyndon Johnson. Will the great silent majority stand behind me for peace with honor?
Yeah, no, it is an amazing story. Let me take it further though, and
Sure.
let me jump ahead. The impeachment of Richard Nixon. People don't understand what were in those articles of impeachment, do they?
No, they don't. In the first article, I believe, was constituted. The second article was Nixon and people in Nixon's White House called the IRS and suggested they audit someone, and the IRS didn't do it.
Right.
But
and
they said, just the idea that you wanted to harass people. Look what they did to these 100 little Tea Party groups,
That's what
ripped them to bits.
How does that compare to? What would Nixon say if he saw what was going on today, do you think?
Well, I think he would be stunned at what they did and Obama got away with. The only reason, there's a number of reasons Obama's not in trouble for it, they haven't brought it into the White House. And Obama, in a lot of cases, Benghazi, I didn't know what was going on. I thought it was a video.
Right.
And
he doesn't know anything.
I don't know anything. I'm clueless.
Yeah, I just saw it on CNN like everyone else.
How do you indict a clueless guy?
Good question. Let's another fiasco I want to get your opinion on is what's going on in Iraq. We just had our defense secretary say, as others have said, that the ISIS is not only a threat to our interests, to the region, but a threat directly to the United States, the homeland, because of the passports they have, because of the Westerners that are involved. I know you're not a hands-on guy when it comes to that region. You think it's best, in many cases, most cases, left well enough alone or bad enough alone.
Right.
What should we do here, since they pose a direct threat, according to our defense secretary, to our homeland?
Well, obviously, we've got to, frankly, our security guys have done a magnificent job since 9/11. They've broken a number of these, these agents who are over here trying to kill us, and they've broken up a number of cells and things. But with that, the first question is, what do we not do? Look, the Iraqi army we left behind with $25 billion worth of equipment is not going to defend its own city of Mosul.
Yeah, they ran.
You're not sending American kids over there to get the city back for them. Secondly, look where ISIS is located. It's northern Syria and northwestern Iraq. Right next door is Turkey. Turkey's been letting these characters into the country. The number of the Gulf states have been arming these Sunnis and helping them out. And I would say, as Americans, look, if you Turks want to go in there and clean up the problem, which is on your southern border like Mexico's on ours, we will back you up. But we're not sending in American boys to fight and win you guys wars when you've been collaborating with these people. But if you want to change your mind and go after them, we will back you up. But we're not sending troops anymore.
All right, along the lines of Iraq, I want you to hear, this will be cut 57. I had recently on the show Richard Pearl,
Sure.
To the topic of the term neocon
Right,
came up.
neoconservatives.
Right, and I want
Sure.
you to watch what he had to say. Do you believe there's any kind of, do you believe that neocon is a code word of sorts?
Oh, yes, it's often used to describe Jewish Americans. Because as it happens, some of the original thinkers whose ideas have now been characterized by this general term neoconservative were in fact Jewish. And it often carries conspiratorial tones on the part of people who throw the term around.
Do you believe Pat Buchanan fits that description as someone who throws it around and uses that connotation purposely?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And he's done this for a long time.
You want to respond to that?
Sure. For neoconservative, first, most Jewish folks are not neoconservatives. They're a very small, self-identified group whose godfathers were Norman Butthortz and Irving Kristol. and who claimed to be the co-architects, along with the Bush-Cheney folks, of the war in Iraq. And Richard Pearl, my old friend who I was at Reykjavik with, he was one of those folks. They've self-identified as neoconservatives. I'm called a paleoconservative, which translates Latin old conservatives. Neoconservatives were the new conservatives. It's a commonly used term. And
so there's no Jewish connotation or code word as far as
there's no doubt about it that the majority of neoconservatives who argued for war, not a majority certainly, but at least a goodly number, but there's neoconservatives. Bill Bennett's a neoconservative, Pat Moynihan's a neoconservative, Charles Wilson, and all these folks are neoconservative. But there's no doubt that, look, Richard Pearl was deeply pushing the war in Iraq. I believe he was co-author of that PNAC document in the 1990s. They were pushing for a war on Iraq then. And the fact, I think some of these folks are running away from what they have done. They don't like to be identified with what they did.
Quickly, the border crisis. The president playing pool and drinking beer in Colorado, 200 miles from the border now, Mexico. He won't go. What's your take on this whole thing?
Well, I was communications director for the Great Communicator, and if I were communications director in the White House, I would say, put down the beer and put down the pool cue, and I know your original decision, sir, but we better get down to that border because the American people believe it's a crisis, and it is a crisis, and you have said so. And why are you not down there explaining the necessity for your $4 billion program by showing the American people what's going on and saying what you're going to do? Why are you running away from the border?
He doesn't want a photo op, he says.
He doesn't. I mean,
he doesn't want theater.
Well,
all of a sudden,
he's got a photo up playing, Minnesota Fats over there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pat, great to see you, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you
Good
very
to see
much.
you.
The book, The Greatest Comeback: How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority. Patrick J. Buchanan, ladies and gentlemen. And when we come back, we'll be joined by former DOJ attorney Sidney Powell for the latest on the IRS scandal on the Steve Malzberg Show on Newsmax Television.